The first question that I want to ask is, what's so special about 2014 that we had this celebration? Well, my son told me it's the 75th anniversary of Batman, but I don't think that's why we're here tonight. I found out from my daughter that this week is also the 50th anniversary of the It's a Small World ride at Disney. But that's not it either. My microphone keeps working. You fix it? Okay, good. I can work anything, no problem.
Glenn, don't worry, I've got one over here.
Okay, so that's not it either. So the question is, so what is it? Why are we here tonight? Can't hear me? Oh, Patricia, good, okay. Well, with apologies to the show Twilight Zone, I'm going to read a little reason why we're here. 50 years ago, a group of individuals unlocked a door with the key of imagination. Beyond it was another dimension, a dimension of sounds, a dimension of sights, a dimension of minds. Can you hear the music in your phone? Right. They began moving.
What are y'all doing over there anyhow?
I don't know.
Rob, I thought we had a plan.
We're working on perfection tonight. That's why.
And we're working. And we're working.
Okay, and we're working. There we go. Much better. Okay, so you're hearing the music. The people who started this didn't know it at the time, but they had crossed over into the Shar HaShalom zone. Tonight, we will remember that journey as we look back into the past half century through the recollections of some of our fellow congregants that are here tonight. In your program, which I hope you've all had a chance to look at, we've included a history of our synagogue's founding and a timeline of some of the key events. Also included in that brochure is a listing of the more than 200 Benot Mitzvah that we've held at Shar HaShalom during these years. That's pretty special. On behalf of the committee, in advance, our apologies if we left any Benot Mitzvah out of the program. There's a lot of work coming through, a lot of data. But the good thing about everything that we've done the last several months is the synagogue has a real collection of information about the last 50 years that we're going to keep, we're going to archive, and we're going to take good care of. While we celebrate as a synagogue a half century, we also want to recognize some other important milestones about this year. Our religious school director, Katie Izagan, will begin. We'll give her a round of applause. Katie, if you'll stand wherever you are. Where are you, Katie? And remain standing. Katie's going to begin her 15th year of service to the synagogue this year. Her boundless energy and dedication to our children is one of the reasons our synagogue has attracted so many young families, and I'm happy to see some of them here tonight. Thank you very much, Katie. Rabbi Fedorov, if you'll stand. Our rabbi will begin his 20th year with us, and I'm very proud to call him my friend. In addition to the many responsibilities he has at the synagogue, he's of course the host of a radio talk show called The Show of Faith, 1070 on Sundays at 7 o'clock, and he paid me to do that. He's also an accomplished author, and you haven't got his book yet, it's a great read. And put a smile on his face and say that he's the proud grandfather of Henry. Rabbi, thank you for all your years. Okay, and last but not least, our Benot Mitzvah tutor, Dorit Mittelfeld. Where's Dorit? Dorit will begin her 25th year with us. It's an amazing accomplishment. Dorit, you never fail to amaze us with your dedication to your students. You bring out the best in all of them, and we thank you for that. And on with the show. The Gala Committee, the Gala Committee chose our first speakers to cover the 1960s and 1970s. Those were turbulent years. Hang on a second, hang on, don't jump. Those were turbulent years. Just to refresh your memory, in the 1960s, Israel fought the Six-Day War. Alfred Hitchcock's film Psycho was released. We saw the first televised presidential debates between Nixon and Kennedy. Lasers were invented, and for my NASA friends, Apollo 11, of course, landed on the moon. The birth control pill was approved by the FDA in those years. Rabbi, I'm sure, remembers that Woodstock was held in the 60s.
Yay! If you remember, you weren't there.
And sadly, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Robert Kennedy were all assassinated in that time. In the 70s, we have a very special thing to mention. Shar HaShalom celebrated its first bar mitzvah. And I'm very happy to say that that bar mitzvah is here with us tonight. Mark Boyne, if you'll stand. Thank you for coming, Mark. Also in the 70s, just to carry the thought forward, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir passed away. Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Egyptian President Anwar Sadat signed the Camp David Accord. Terrorist attacks, of course, happened at the Munich Games, and we lost many of our Israeli heroes. The Beatles, I'm sorry to say, Rabbi, broke up in that period of time. I know that's one you felt terrible about. Elvis Presley died of a drug overdose.
He went home.
For Mark Cuban, computer floppy disks, VCRs, and pocket calculators were introduced, as well as, if whoever remembers, the Sony Walkman came out. You know, we don't have those things anymore. They're antiques.
I still have one.
Do you? Microsoft was founded, and the first test tube baby was born. On TV, MASH premiered. Roots, the miniseries, was shown, and near and dear to my heart, the first Star Wars movie was released. Mark Spitz won 7 gold medals. The Watergate scandal began. Roe versus Wade was legalized abortion. The United States finally pulled out of Vietnam. Iran took the American hostages in Tehran. The 3 Mile Island nuclear accident occurred. And lastly, President Nixon resigned during that time period. I would like to ask that if you joined the synagogue during the 60s or 70s, that you would please rise and be recognized. I would like to welcome our first speakers to the podium, Shirley Safer and Wendy King. Both Shirley and Wendy were vital members of the Gala Committee. And ladies, we could not have put on tonight's event without you.
Wendy said I'm first. I just wanted to tell you, and some of you don't know me, I'm Shirley Safer. I think I'm the only founding person that's left of everybody here in this area. I think so. And the way all this started is my husband and I came out here, Mel, and we met at a friend's house, Manny Schnitzer, with about 5 or 6 people. And from there, people started coming out of the walls, and we made phone calls, and we contacted everybody, and we had services at the basement of a First City Bank where the, what restaurants there? The Indian restaurants there now. And we had a candy cleaner that came out twice a month. We had a little cigar box, put the money in there, and that's what he got paid for. And this one would say, I'm going to bring a cake, and this one's going to bring coffee. So we went from there to Webster Civic Center, and then from there we went to the Lutheran Church, which is torn down now. And we had a small ark we had built there. One of our congregants built it, and Mark had his bar mitzvah there, I believe. And from there we grew and grew, and Mel made a promise. We were in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and just gotten out of the Air Force. And he came out here on business with a friend of his. This friend had a private plane, and he needed a co-pilot. And he said, come on, go with me. So Mel's first love was flying anyway. So he came out here, went to see what he had to do, and he said, come on, let me show you a new area. So came out here, and Mel saw this big sign that said Clear Lake City, the city of the future. And all of a sudden he had this, I don't know, I guess in his body, just tingling. And he said, somebody told him something, and he said, I think this is what I want to do, because things had not been too well for us in Baton Rouge. So he called me and said where he was, and would you like to move? I said, where? And he told me. I said, fine, I'll be packed in 24 hours. We had relatives there from both sides of the family, and I had the car completely packed by 3 o'clock in the morning. And we deeded our house to a gentleman for $10. Came out here, and Mel worked for Del Webb as a realtor. That was the beginning of Clear Lake City. And over there, I had the beginning. All you'll see is just potholes and cows. And that's all that was here. And just the beginning of NASA. Okay, the first house he sold, we had a whole bunch of bills and everything, and 2 little kids. We lived in an apartment. Tammy was a year old, Vicky was 3, and I think, good, he's sold a house, he's going to come home, we'll get some bills paid. Well, guess what? He came home with a 2-door Triumph. The man didn't have any money, so that's what he got, was the car. Well, next week he traded it off for something else. This is what Mel did. But he did make a promise. He said, God, things had not been too well, but if you would just give me the strength and the power and the guidance, I will make sure, I promise you, Clear Lake City will have a congregation here one day. And he did not break that promise. And that's today. He was a man of his word. He started the Junior Chamber of Commerce, and he was involved. He had his hand, he even bought a fire engine with a realtor, and they drove around Nassau Bay and Clear Lake City. He did things like that. But and then he flew out at Ellington with the reserves. So there were a lot of things here that brought him. And we were very happy to raise our kids. That Vicki and Tammy were the first kids in the elementary school in Clear Lake City. And we have been very happy here. Is that it?
I'm Linda Kane. I moved here in 1968. The 70s were quite tumultuous for us in such an era of growth. We went from, as Shirley said, we were in House of Prayer Lutheran Church. They were so kind to us. We shared their facility for 4 or 5 years. They had a huge cross at their altar, probably about 12 feet tall. So on Friday night, there was a crew of us. We had about a 2-story 2x4s and long drapes that we hung to cover the cross. to make it look a little more Jewish. And we did have a portable ark, just like the Jews in the desert. We had our portable ark that was also handmade. We were blessed to have one of the oldest Torahs in Texas that was a gift to us. And we draped the beamer, so every night there was a group of us that set up the church to be a synagogue, and then we took it down. That happened for years and years, and they were very, very kind to us. During the 70s, we also moved on. We hired our first rabbi, Rabbi Landman. He was the grandfather to those of us that were here. Nobody had family. We were all from somewhere else, so he was a wonderful beginning for us. We bought land. We finally pulled together and bought land, and there was 10 families that co-signed a $100,000 note so that we could be sure that we could build a building, so if the synagogue couldn't pay it, we would pay it. And that was the commitment that we made, to make sure that we had a synagogue here for everybody to have a future. I want to tell you how I got to Clear Lake City. In those days it was aerospace, so you either worked for aerospace if you were down here, or occasionally petrochemical. Nobody did anything else but aerospace or petrochemical. Stephen came down on a recruiting trip, and I was 9 months pregnant. It was the middle of December. I was due to have my first child in the middle of January, so of course I got on an airplane full term to fly down here. On the flight, I said, there's no way we can live out there, though, because there can't be any Jews out in the country like that. I'd already checked the distance from Clear Lake to Houston, and I went, there can't be any Jews, there can't be a synagogue, we're having our first child, I can't do that, I've got to be in a synagogue. Then we landed at Hobby. It was one of those glorious winter days, you know, rotten, stinky, wet, cold. The wind was blowing, and it smelled like Pasadena. Oh my God, I'm definitely sure that we can't live there. We rented a car, and we drove south, and we drove, and we drove. You know what we saw? Nothing. There wasn't anything. There were spolies in the middle of a field. It had big blue awnings and mud. And I looked over at Stephen and I said, that's it. That's definitely for sure that we can't live there. There can't be anything. We were greeted by the person that he was interviewing. They took us to Jimmy Walker's in Kemah, which was about the only restaurant here in those days too. All right, so we ate lunch. He finished his interview, and I hauled my pregnant body back to the Ramada Inn. Since I was about 50 pounds overweight, I needed to rest. I took a few minutes, made a few phone calls. I called synagogues in Houston. I wanted to ask. You know, I talked to a very fine gentleman, and I said, are there Jews in Clear Lake? Can you give me some names of some Jews? Is there a synagogue? I explained who I was. I told him I was sitting in a motel room right across from the Manned Space Center, as it was called then. I was going to have a baby. Can you give me the name of a nice Jewish doctor? I'm going to have a baby. I need that too. He took my information, he gave me a few names, and that was it. I'm resting. Stephen came home, and we're sitting in the room talking. He's talking about his interview, and all of a sudden, there's this banging and banging and banging on the door. I freaked out. I went, nobody knows we're here. Is the hotel on fire? So we jumped up. I threw on a robe. We threw the door open, and there was these insane 2 Jewish women that came dashing in to rescue me because I was having a baby in a hotel across the street from NASA. We laughed and laughed and laughed, and I knew then in my heart this was the place to be. If these 2 Jewish women could come to rescue someone they didn't even know, it just broke my heart. I said, this is it, this is our home. We loved it. That was in December. We moved here in very early January, very pregnant. Luckily, he was 2 weeks late. He was born at St. Luke's. There wasn't a hospital out here. And the sign in Webster had said, welcome to Webster, 725. And with the birth of David Michael Cain, it was 726. And you know what? 50 years later, we're still here. And we love it.
Before you leave, one more thing.
Wendy, who were the 2 Jewish women? One of them was Barbara Stratton. I don't remember the other one.
Wanted to sell a house.
Wanted to sell her a house. Oh, sweet. Wendy. Oh. Hey, lady. Mark Bowen wants to know who the women were. One of the ladies was Barbara Stratton. That was a realtor, and I don't even remember. I know her. still out here selling
still out there.
Watch the quarters. No tripping. There's no tripping allowed
There
tonight.
are a couple of doctors here.
Yeah, you're right. Thanks, Wendy and Shirley. We really appreciate it. Okay, moving right along. Obviously, the 80s came next. I'm going to give up on that in a second. The 80s were also challenging times for our country. John Lennon was assassinated. Mount St. Helens erupted. Pac-Man, the video game, was released. And many of us spent our time playing with Rubik's Cube. Everybody remember that? Ted Turner established CNN, which is still going strong. Assassination attempts were made on the Pope and President Ronald Reagan. First woman was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Millions watched the royal wedding of Charles and Diana. I was one of them. A plague known as AIDS was first identified. Personal computers were introduced by IBM. In the entertainment industry, E.T., the extraterrestrial, was released, as well as Michael Jackson's Thriller, and no, I won't do it. The hole in the ozone layer was first detected.
Government conspiracy.
We lost a bunch of friends as the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded shortly after takeoff. The Mir space station was first launched. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred, as well as the Exxon Valdez oil spill. DNA testing first came into prominence and was used to convict criminals in a courtroom for the first time. And the Berlin Wall fell in the 80s. Please take a moment and rise if you joined Shah Shalom in the 1980s. Our next speaker is David Rosenfeld. David served as president from 1986 until 1990. Please welcome David to the podium.
Good evening. When I came here in 1979, it was a synagogue. There were 80 Jewish families in the synagogue, and I thought that was marvelous. However, the first thing that I did, I promised that I will speak only 5 minutes, and I will cover 10 years of my involvement in the congregation. When I first came here, my first involvement was youth group advisor. Now, I've been a scoutmaster for many years before I came here, and I thought this would be an easy introduction to congregation life. And for the first 6 months, it was. But then someone had the bright idea of introducing a lock-in. Now, for those of you who don't know what a lock-in is, you take a group of teenagers and a sleeping bag, and you lock them in the synagogue and they stay there overnight. Well, myself and 2 chaperones had 40 preteens and teenagers. The sanctuary was a small little room, just about where the rabbi's office is now. We started off, we fed them. It worked out great. We played games. They loved it. They had dancing. Girls loved it, the fellas didn't like it too much. It was time to go to bed. I said, great, that was easy. Everything is over with. Well, I was mistaken. Myself and the 2 chaperones spent all evening with a flashlight wondering who has that portable radio in their sleeping bag. Why is there a group giggling in the back? And how come there are more than one body in each sleeping bag? Well, when the morning came, I breathed a sigh of relief, and I knew then that that was my first lock-in as a chaperone, and also my last. From there, I moved on to education vice president. Aha, I'm dealing with adults now, I'm not going to have any problems. Not so. First thing the committee tried to introduce was an extra hour in Hebrew school. Bumpy road, but it worked out and we were successful. Then we tried to introduce a dress code. Parents were in uproar, the students were in uproar, and as long as I was on that committee, we never did get a dress code through. From there, I moved on to the presidency. Now, that's a job that I wouldn't wish on anybody. I loved it, I had a great time with it, but I nearly broke up my marriage because of it. Everyone knows what a marathon race is. The objective of a marathon race is to finish as quickly as possible. Well, Shah Shalom had their own version of a marathon race. They called it a congregation board meeting. 12 adults sitting around a table trying to get their own ideas across over everyone else's voice. Now, of course, these meetings would start around 7 p.m. By 1:30 in the morning when I got home, my wife would say, "Where were you for 6.5 hours?" Now, how do you explain we were sitting around a table for 6.5 hours discussing congregation business? That's a big one to swallow. Well, I found a quick solution. I got my wife involved in the congregation business, and she came to the meetings with me, and she saw what happened. Not only did the congregation invent their own marathon, they invented their own dance step. Now, many of you may not remember this. The sanctuary served as both a sanctuary and a social hall, where the rabbi's office and the secretary's office was. Well, what we would do at the sanctuary, after the service, everyone would pick up their chair, run to the side, put the chair on the side, run back, grab a table, bring it out, set up the owner. That became known as the Shah HaShalom Shuffle. Now, I believe that was a major driving force in us pushing for a new building. That's my 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Our picture guy.
Picture guy.
Oh, he's got
Picture guy? Shalom Shalom Shuffle.
I think we lost Richard. Oh, there it is. Step over, you're right.
Over here because
You're
the
right.
mic's in the way.
Thank you, David.
Welcome.
Our time machine trip takes us next to the 1990s. Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres, and Yasser Arafat were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. We saw the collapse of the Soviet Union and Operation Desert Storm. South Africa repealed apartheid. It was the official end of the Cold War. The World Trade Center and Oklahoma City were bombed. Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. O.J. Simpson, I'm sure you all watched it on TV, was arrested. Nelson Mandela was elected president of South Africa. Princess Diana, who we saw be married years before, died in a car crash. And the JFK legacy ended when JFK Jr. died in a plane crash. Bill Clinton was impeached, and coincidentally, Viagra came on the market. My son wanted me to delete that one. Titanic became the most successful movie ever, and for some reason, everyone was terrified of the Y2K bug. Weren't we all fooled? We chose 2 speakers to handle the 1990s. The first will be Leonard Levine, who served as synagogue president from 93 to 94. After Leonard speaks, Rabbi Federow, who began his service to Shah HaShalom in 1995, is also going to have a few words. We also asked Rabbi Federow to speak because we didn't want to miss an opportunity to see him get emotional. It happens so rarely. But first up will be Leonard Levine.
Well, you might say that the 1990s were a rather interesting time to be here in the congregation. When Ron first approached me and offered me the honor of speaking tonight, my first thought was, when the heck were the 90s? Well, I finally kind of thought back, figured out what went on. 90s were different. When we entered the 90s as a congregation, I was working on the building committee. Marty Mayer unfortunately was leading the committee and had to take an absence, and he reluctantly asked me to take the lead.